my major was political science, but I was in the jazz band and I was obsessed with music. And these are like the two most difficult things to monetize ever. I mean, really, political science leads you to being a lawyer, and music leads you to being broke. And since I didn't want to be a lawyer, I chose the path of being broke. And that was pretty.
Welcome to the EasySpeak Speakeasy.
You've unlocked the door to unfiltered mental health and wellness conversations.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so here we are, Christy and Diana back at it again at the EasySpeak Speakeasy.
Yes, bring it through unfiltered mental health and wellness conversations right to your eardrums.
Yes, right to your eardrums and to your eyeballs if you happen to be watching us on YouTube.
And lucky you if that's the case.
I know. Both of us look great today, by the way. Just gotta say.
Yeah, just being modest.
Per usual. So today we actually have our first guest for the last, of course, my dogs would be barking right now, for the last year and not a half, yes, year and a couple months. It's been you and I, our voices on this podcast, and we've been guiding all the conversations. And this year we made a commitment that we would be bringing on other voices and more guests. And so we have some guests in the pipeline, which I'm very excited about. And today we have Jesse Marseille, who I'm going to let him introduce himself, but he has a really interesting story that I feel like touches on a lot of the things we talk about here on the podcast. And he's also the host of the Storytelling at Scale podcast. And so we want to welcome Jesse to the EasySpeak Speakeasy.
Woo!
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much, Diana and Christy. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're so excited.
Welcome.
Welcome. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, we must have a toast for this momentous occasion. So we are drinking today ranch water. Cheers.
Cheers, mate.
And we will put our recipe up on screen for anybody who wants to take a screenshot and have a little sippy with us. Or you could make a little mocktail.
That's true.
If you choose not to indulge in the tequila.
Yeah.
It was simple enough for me to follow. So that you made it easy on me.
Yeah, that was the goal. We've gone all out with some of these drinks with, specialized syrups and garnish and stuff, and we wanted to make it easy for you. So
we were like, should we make him shake an egg white? What do you think?
Oh my goodness. So Jesse, do you mind just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself? I had the pleasure of talking with you a couple of weeks ago and hearing a little bit about your story. But KG hasn't really heard a ton. I'm sure she's done a little bit of her own kind of research and looked into you and what you do. But tell us about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. And I think the word of the day for me, or the word of the year, is reinvention. And you caught me at an interesting time where I'm reinventing myself and my career live in the moment and in a public way to some extent. So it's fun to be on this show and share it a little bit. If I rewind about 10 years or so, when I was just getting out of college, I really didn't know what the heck I was going to do, like so many of us. And I'd studied jazz guitar in school, and so my major was political science, but I was in the jazz band and I was obsessed with music. And these are like the two most difficult things to monetize ever. I mean, really, political science leads you to being a lawyer, and music leads you to being broke. And since I didn't want to be a lawyer, I chose the path of being broke. And, that was pretty fun when I was 22 or 23. But at a certain point, you get a little tired of couch surfing and that kind of thing. And so I said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and try to find a job where you can make some money. What job can you make some money that I don't have to go to grad school for? And my answer was, I'll get into sales. And what started as kind of just a means to an end, oh, I'll pick up some commission jobs and make a little bit more money than I would serving coffee or something like that, suddenly took over my life and my career. And 5 or 6 years later, I was flying around the country and working 60 hours a week in, corporate America. And we can get more into the details later, but basically I burned out in a pretty substantial way. I had what you would call probably a mental health breakdown. And this was there were multifaceted reasons for this, but fundamentally I wasn't aligned in my career. And over time, I started to get my mental health back in order. I went into therapy. I started exercising more and all of that, and things started to get better. But I still knew, you know what, this isn't the career for me. And so I started thinking, well, what's my escape plan and how do I do something that's a little more meaningful? And that's how my podcast, Storytelling at Scale, was born. And it's my attempt to share other people's stories in the hopes that it's cathartic for them to get it out, and also that I get to learn from the lesson and that the audience gets to learn from the lessons that my amazing guests have in some ways learned the hard ways.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's interesting because we've had the conversation recently about, especially for younger folks who are trying to figure out what they want to do, like what direction they want to take in life. And, it can be really challenging to kind of set forth on a journey, especially if you're not terribly committed to it, or if you don't have a high level of passion for it. And what does that end up looking like in terms of quality of life, right? And so it's really interesting. One of the questions that I had after listening to you the other day and listening to you today was, I feel like we all have had in our lives, moments that changed everything for us, right? Is that moment, and then the next moments after that are completely transformational and different. And so for you, was there like a particular moment where you were like, okay, I definitely can't do this anymore. Tomorrow I'm doing something different. Like, was it one moment, or, I know you mentioned kind of burning out and there being like a series of things that went into that process of kind of burning out, but was there one thing in particular that happened where you were like, okay, no, like this needs to change and it needs to change now?
Yeah, there definitely was. I mean, there was a progressive set of events that led to the transformative event. So to give a little bit of background, I started getting really sick. We could talk a little bit more about that later, but basically I started having health issues that were arising because of being overly stressed, having poor lifestyle choices, as a result of being misaligned in my career. So I wasn't getting enough sleep. I was definitely partying too much on the weekends. And I was just driving really hard emotionally towards goals that I didn't actually care that much about. And my body started to react. I started to get really sick, put me in the hospital many, many times. And eventually, after one particularly bad stint of this illness, I actually got fired from my job. And that was definitely the transition point where it was like, I don't want to apply for the same kind of job that I had before. This is leading me down the wrong path. My health is not worth making the money that I was making. It was affecting my relationships. I just said, I've had enough of this. It's time to do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's the decisions that others make that kind of help to catalyze us to make a change, right? Hindsight's always 2020. Do you ever wonder, if you would have made that change at that time, if you hadn't been fired, do you feel like you would have probably kept going for a little while longer, or were you definitely in a place where it was time for a change regardless?
You know what's crazy is for months I had been waking up every morning and hoping that I would get fired.
Wow.
So that's a sign that you're probably not in the right job. It
Yeah.
really got to the point where I was like, I would rather drive Uber and just have things be chill for a while than keep doing what I'm doing. And the universe kind of made that decision for me, but I was definitely getting very close to my breaking point, and that probably has to do with the fact that I got fired as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was just gonna say this is what we call manifesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading this book right now about shadow work and, your shadow and kind of the hidden desires that maybe you've swept under the rug that you haven't fully processed, but the ways that it still impacts your decision making and what you bring into your life, what you manifest into your life. And I wasn't super educated on this part of psychology. And honestly, if I had heard about this 10 years ago, I would have been like, come on, that's BS.
Mhm.
Now that I've had more life experience, I'm like, no, buddy, that's a real thing. Like your subconscious creates things for yourself that you're not necessarily processing above the surface. And as I learn more about this and analyze it, it's definitely true. So it's interesting you brought that up.
Totally. Diana and I are big master manifestors.
Yeah.
We talk about this a lot. We actually did an entire podcast episode about the power of manifesting and how important it is to kind of take the time to process things and pay attention to that little inner voice that might be there that you're kind of ignoring or not paying as much attention to your instincts and those sorts of things along the way.
Yeah, totally. Because we always are taught in school, and there's reasons for this, but like we're taught to make decisions logically.
Mm-hmm.
And I would literally create pros and cons lists, like what are the good reasons? What are the bad reasons?
Yeah.
But what's so funny is when I'd be faced with a decision and I could have a list of 20 things that were good about doing it and only a couple things that are bad. If my inner voice said no, I still felt conflicted, even
Yeah.
though logically it seemed like the right path.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. And part of that is, just kind of being tuned in to who you are and your instincts and, that North Star, what your own personal North Star is. And it can be so challenging to stick to that and to even view it and know what it is when you're having that kind of like dissonance, what your reality is versus what, your external reality versus your internal reality, and trying to figure all that out while also keeping an eye on the prize and doing the things you need to do to get there. It's such, it's one of the more challenging aspects of really great mental health is figuring out how to reconcile all of those different pieces and being okay with the pieces that don't reconcile, and maybe those pieces need to fall off or whatever the case may be. It's really interesting.
This idea of making lists reminds me of Diana knows this about me, that I'm such a sucker for a good rom-com.
Yeah.
And every rom-com, there's like, not everyone, but so many of them, people like they have that moment and they're like, I went out and I made this list of pros and cons. And you know what? In the end, I tore up that list and followed my heart.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's so true.
It's the basis for everything, right? It's like, if you just like let all of that go and follow your intuition, you end up making the decision that ends up working out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm
you
living
feel
that.
happy
Yeah.
about that, right? Like there's so much joy in making a decision, even if over time it doesn't work out the way that you thought it was, but you did what you felt you should have done in that moment. I feel like there's never regret that's tied to that.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So true. I agree. Yeah. I think one of the things that also resonated for me about your story, Jesse, is the connection between our physical health and our mental health. It seems like based on what your story is that there may have been some kind of like internal struggle that was happening, but we tend to kind of like distract ourselves from our inner turmoil, right? Either by working more or, there's a multitude of things that we as human beings do to distract ourselves from the fact that maybe the reality that we're living in doesn't match up with what we want to see happen on the inside. But, from a physical health standpoint, there is no avoiding it. It's like your body is always going to tell you when something's wrong, regardless if you want to listen to it or not. And it sounds like your body was like literally screaming at you to figure something out. And, at the end of the day, it's one of those things that, it can be really challenging to kind of reconcile those two things. But, in talking about what the things are that you've done to kind of be on this healing journey and to heal yourself, I'm hearing a good mixture of things that are both physical in nature, as well as like from a mental health, psychological standpoint, right? Like going to the gym but also like seeing a therapist. And I feel like that's kind of like the balance that we're always talking about and achieving, and, how they both go hand in hand.
They really do. And there's this amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score that
Yeah.
my wife passed on to me that made a big difference. And I think for me, a lot of the lack of understanding of those internal body systems came from social conditioning, just around, you're a man, you're a boy, you're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to work hard, and that's just part of the game. And all of us get this conditioning from society, no matter who we are, and we absorb certain almost mythologies around what we are supposed to be in life. And so I was on the wrestling team as a kid, and it's like notoriously a sport where you're supposed to be tough and you're supposed to push through pain. And I just unconsciously just kind of absorbed that as my mindset of like, you're tired, you've been working hard, work harder. That's the answer. Toughen up, stick it out. And, hard work is part of life, and there's a time and a place for it. But at the point that you're pushing through your body's signals that you need to chill out, you're doing something unhealthy for yourself. And so reading that book, and then there was another one called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which talks about how animals, unless they are in captivity, so animals in the wild, basically do not get stress-induced conditions such as ulcers. And it's really interesting because humans are basically the only species that can get ourselves so worked up psychologically, or our environment can get us so worked up psychologically, that we actually have a physical reaction to it. And so those two books gave me some context and some tools for monitoring my mental and my physical state and seeing what was going on. And you're absolutely right. Fixing this problem required both mental health interventions and physical health interventions. And the other thing I want to say about that is I realized that physical health goes so far beyond how many push-ups you can do.
Yeah.
Like, being physically strong or whatever, I saw myself as an athlete. It was like, I'm not sick, I'm healthy, I can lift weights, or I can run a mile. You might be able to lift weights, but that doesn't mean that your body is actually in a state of hormonal balance, that you're getting enough sleep, all of these things that reset the chemicals in your brain that make you capable of coping in a positive way with being resilient is probably a better word. Like, your brain needs the resources, your body needs the resources to be able to respond and adapt to what the changing circumstances in your life. And I just noticed when something small would happen, like I would get a delivery of some little piece of furniture, and I'd be setting it up and there'd be a screw missing, or I lost the screw, and I would just get so frustrated, and I'd feel this knot in my chest. And it was like, that's not me. I'm a chill person. I'm not someone that's supposed to get upset about this IKEA like bedside table. What is going on? And it's almost like that energy bar in a video game where like your energy bar is getting depleted and then your character dies or whatever. My energy bar was like nothing. So the littlest thing would set me off. And yeah, like I said, part of the feedback I got was just from the relationships around me. It was like, Jesse, why is your fuse so short? And yeah, a lot of this has to do with the sleep. A lot of it has to do with the internal thought processes and all of that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I love that correlation between the other animals and beings on this planet. I think that's something that is so profound that people, it's profound, but it's simple to understand, right? People can really connect to that analogy and thinking about those things, because I do think that people have a really tough time understanding how much stress affects our bodies and our mental status, and how that then affects our energy and the way that we are in the world. And then that turns into how people respond to us. And then that starts the cycle, right? Of just the way that relationships are built and are going, and all of those things. And it continues to kind of perpetuate until you realize those things and start to make a shift towards the better. So that's very interesting. I really like that thought process. As you were talking, I was thinking, I'm interested, um, when you shared in your journey how, you got to sort of a breaking point, right? And ended up needing to have some other types of supports in your life. We talk a lot about when somebody has mental health in a family, the entire family is affected by that person's mental health needs. So I'm wondering, at that time, do you feel like that was impactful on your family, or was there another time in your life where you had mental health needs that had surfaced, and then kind of things were better for a while, and then this stress kind of induced this to happen again?
Yeah, so the first sign there for me was withdrawing from relationships that were important to me, and withdrawing from my broader social network. It was this thought process of, I'm too worked up about this, or I'm overwhelmed by this, so I would rather just not be social because I don't want to put that energy on somebody else. I don't want to impact them with my negativity. But of course, isolation then feeds that process and it gets worse. So yeah, you're definitely right about that. It did impact my family life and my friendships. And that, thankfully, I have really great people overall in my network. And that was part of where I started to get some of the signals that I needed that something was amiss.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting, to kind of think about. It's kind of the domino effects, from an individual standpoint, right? And then also with our network and work and everything, mental health is just so ubiquitous. It affects every aspect of our lives. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations. Do you feel like, I mean, I know we messaged a little bit the other day, and it sounds like people are really kind of loving the podcast. Do you feel like the message and the conversations you're having are impactful at this point? Like, do you feel like people are really making a difference in their lives, and making changes through, listening to and or having these conversations with you on a regular basis?
Well, there's two places where I think an impact is being made. So the first one is, I think it's just inherently cathartic for people to share their stories.
Hmm.
For me right now, even just talking about this, it's like a little load off, just kind of processing it, getting it out there, taking something that was internal and externalizing it. And there's something about sharing that with somebody who's willing to hear it, who's a caring person, where you feel seen. And so in some small way, I feel like I can help create a forum for people to do that. just in the dialogue with me on the show, like I'm listening to them. I care about what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate them coming on and being willing to do that publicly, because what that then does is it creates an example of how individuals can have a dialogue like that, where they can share those experiences. And oftentimes it's back and forth with my guests. They're sharing with me and I'm interviewing with them, but I also reflect on my journey. So it's helpful for me. It's helpful for them. We compare notes. And I know that's been impactful because people are messaging me about it and they're saying like, hey, I really relate to what that person said. On another level, some of the folks that I have on are people who are very mission driven about a particular cause that they care about, either because it has impacted them personally, or because they just are extremely inspired by that cause and want to help out with it. So as an example, just before our show today, I was editing a podcast that I did with a veteran who has post-traumatic stress from several tours, and he was trying to figure out what to do in civilian life, and it took him a very long time to kind of get his bearings and figure out what his new mission was going to be. And so one of the things that benefited him was he went on this outdoor wilderness experience, and it was extremely therapeutic for him to go get out in the wilderness and talk about his experiences with other people. And he goes, oh my gosh, this helped me so much more than some of the other things that the VA was doing. And he goes, I want to create an organization that makes this possible for other veterans. And he did. And so the hope for that podcast is, yeah, he and I are having a dialogue and I get to learn from him and he gets to share with me. And I think that's beautiful. But also I hope that other veterans who are maybe struggling to find the resources that they need can hear that podcast and go, you know what? I want to go see what Anthony's organization is about, or something similar that's in my area, and go get more holistic support.
I love that. It's really beautiful. And I think really similar to what we're looking to do here at the Easy Speak, is to just make it normal to have these conversations. And, we always say the stigma with mental health is alive and well, unfortunately, right? It still kind of permeates across cultural lines and affects all of our ability to access resources and get support. And like you said, there's, that part of it that's that cultural conditioning, right? And across cultures that looks different. But it's all really still the same. It's all really rooted in kind of like that stigma, and, by way of stigma comes shame, right? If you're experiencing these challenges, there's an air of shame that it comes up, and, can make it even more challenging to talk about and or address it. So, platforms like this where people can, like you said, see a model for what it's like to just have this conversation over drinks, and just talk about it like it's a normal thing, because it is. Mental health affects all of us, regardless of, our background, our socioeconomic status, all of that. And so, yeah, I think that's really awesome that you're able to kind of highlight that storytelling approach and really, show folks the way in terms of having these challenging conversations.
Well, it's given me a ton of compassion. Like you said, everybody has a story and everybody has some experience with mental health challenges. And maybe it's them personally, or maybe it's a family member. Everybody has it. And so for me, going through this experience has increased my compassion substantially, because mental health challenges are not something that you are necessarily visible. And so it's pushed me to dig a little bit deeper and try to understand people on a deeper level, even if I don't immediately know exactly what's going on in their life.
Yeah, compassion is so powerful. It feels like it should be like a built-in human emotion, like anxiety is, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that way, but it makes such a huge difference. Even like for myself as a therapeutic provider, people always, you go to school to become a therapeutic provider and, all of these things, but like 90% of my work is just showing compassion and empathy and making people feel comfortable and cultivating a relationship where people feel like they can be vulnerable, right? And so lots of things can be therapeutic if they have those components to them, including podcasts like these. So super
And
cool.
it's such a, you know, it's amazing that we have the ability to be able to have platforms like podcasts and other things that are not just they're accessible in multiple different ways, right? Like people can watch this or they can listen to it and they can do it whenever is easy for them and convenient for them. And I think that is something that is also quite helpful when it comes to mental health. We actually had a parent that met with us to just chat about our services and how helpful they were. And one of the things that she said was that one of the Pearls, who is one of the lived experience coaches that works with families that we support, introduced her to several podcasts that have like changed her
Mm.
thinking about what it has to do with her family and her kids' mental health needs and how she can parent better and differently. And it was like, typically in the past, I think people just think like therapy or nah, right? Like that's all that there
Mhm.
is like no other way. And so there's just, I think, an awakening that's happening around mental health. And, when you were talking about um, mental health sort of is everybody has an experience with it. I remember when I was younger, people used to say that about cancer, right? Like everybody
Mm.
has an experience with cancer, either themselves or with somebody that they know. And I feel like that it's something that we don't hear anymore about cancer. It's just like something that is known, right? Because it's so prevalent. And now people are starting to talk about mental health more, and that kind of terminology and parallels are starting to be made. And I hope that means that more opportunities like this start to happen where people like us get together in a room and just chat about, whatever is happening in our lives, whether it has to do with our mental health or what happened at work today, or, it's just all one big conversation and nobody feels nervous about talking about the fact that, things aren't going well and it's making them feel anxious or upset or, depressed or, the myriad of other ways that our emotions can show up based on what's happening in our lives.
Well, you said something really interesting, which is you used to see it as therapy or nothing kind of. And I totally agree with that. It's this kind of binary assumption that if you're going to address your mental health, you see a therapist and that's kind of it. And to be clear, therapy helped me a ton,
Mm.
no doubt. Also, there's more to your mental health journey than just therapy. And my therapist would remind me that you have to take what you learned here out of the sessions and embody it in your life. And so for me, what was therapy? It was my opportunity to connect with myself on a deeper level through that therapeutic relationship. And so part of the mission of the podcast is to extend that then outside of the boundaries of the one-on-one therapy relationship for me and turn it into more of a community feeling. And when I've had some younger professionals reach out to me based on the podcast and be like, what helped you the most? What should I do? I'm in therapy, but I don't know what the next steps are. It's like, what are opportunities that you can create for yourself to just build connection with people that have aligned values? And I think podcasts are a really cool way to do it, because if people listen to you for, a few dozen episodes, they kind of understand what you're about, and probably they have things in common with the other listeners to your show. So eventually I would like to build a community around my show, but that's a second half of 2024 goal, I think.
Hashtag goals. Goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, as you both were kind of just reflecting on that, I was just thinking about, how it's therapy is essentially what we're saying is therapy is kind of subjective situation, and it's, we have our preconceived notions of what that is, right? We're laying on the couch and we're talking about like our mothers and our childhood and there are tears, and that's a component of it, but
That's just a normal Friday night at my house.
we take turns, we rotate the couch position, right?
Oh my gosh.
It's Sunday at my house. Sunday dinner. And so, but I think it really is a testament. This conversation really is a testament to, what makes the mental health space so unique and amazing despite its various challenges, is that there is that room for interpretation and reinterpretation based off of all of our individual and collective experiences, and I just feel like mental health is one of those spaces. It's one of the reasons why I decided to go into the mental health field, is because I feel like there's just so much room for innovation and to rethink how we approach mental health in general, and there's so many new frontiers happening, as it relates to mental health. And so I'm wondering, Jesse, is there anything that's happening kind of in the mental health space that you're like keeping an eye on, that you're like, oh, this is really interesting, or maybe I want to try this in the future? There's so many things. Like I saw your post the other day on my timeline talking about like cold plunges and like microgreens, and you were like, nope, didn't work for me, not a thing. um but like that's like the thing right now, right? You go on Instagram and everyone's got a tub in their backyard filled with ice, and they're like, this is so good for your mental health, and like it works for some people but not for everyone. So anyway, is there anything that you feel like is kind of like a trend or something that's kind of on the horizon in the mental health space that's piqued your interest, either from an individual perspective or even for the podcast?
Well, yeah, you mentioned a lot of it, and I would say I'm kind of a hobbyist. I don't know what the right word is. I'm like a mental health hobbyist and
Love it.
fan of all of the innovation that's happening. I mean, there's a few areas, right? So when I thought about therapy like 20 years ago or whatever, it was very much the Freud stereotype. Like you said, like we're going to look at your earliest memories and your relationship with your mom, and we're going to kind of go from there. And
Yep.
maybe there's some value there for sure, but ultimately therapeutic conversation goes so much deeper, and the potential for scientific research in how a therapeutic conversation can be optimally designed is really important. And so I got kind of into IFS, internal family systems, in the last few years, and I won't say I'm an expert by any means or anything like that, but I've been a participant or a client in IFS therapy, and it was helpful for me, and it totally changed the way that I thought about my psyche. So that side of it, for folks that are interested, I think is pretty cool. The other part that I'm really, really excited about, that we were kind of alluding to earlier, is just community as a means of treating mental health and wellness in general. I think so many of the mental health problems that exist in America in particular are because of disconnection from each other and isolation. And so that's something that I want to be a advocate and a participant in ways that community can help with mental health for sure.
Yeah, I heard a quote a couple of years ago, and cannot stop using it. I wish I need to go back and figure out who said it, because now I'm saying it all the time, and I'm like, this didn't come from me, but I say it all the time. But that mental health is a medical challenge with social solutions.
Yes.
And so that's kind of, I think that, simply put, really helps us to understand why we haven't quite hit the mark yet in terms of streamlining services and getting people the help that they need when they need it, because we're trying to fix everything within a medicalized system, and that's not gonna do it. That's, a piece of the puzzle, right? There are folks who need that traditional therapy. There are folks who need medication, right? Because hormonal and chemical imbalances are real, based on genetics. But that's not the end all be all as it relates to mental health challenges. So yeah, I love that community aspect. I think is super important.
Yeah, and I think with me thinking about my experience and how I entered into mental health, like through my own lived experience of raising a child with mental health needs and being on this journey with him for all of these years. There's been so many different things that we have tried, tested throughout the years, right? Like it's been typical, individual therapy. It's been family therapy, in-home family therapy, and therapeutic mentoring, and equine therapy, where he was, going in at a farm and in like learning about how his own, presence and how his emotions were impacting the animals, and working with a therapist through that, and psychiatrists and medications, to medicate, not to medicate, it's like constant, and having the ability to be nimble enough to navigate through all of these changes over years and over a lifetime, and have the fortitude to do that is super important. And it takes resilience, and it takes a community of people to keep you going, right? Like I keep him going, and my people keep me going, and our like lived experience coaches help our families that we serve to get them going and help them recognize the people that are going to keep them going, because we really have to rely on each other, right? Like I always talk about, you have to find that person that's going to go arm in arm with you down this road together, because it is a rocky one, and sometimes it's the road is flatter, and other times, that hike is more difficult. And so that idea of everything that you're both talking about like how the interfamily work, and thinking about the community effects, whether it's a community based off of a podcast or the people that you're meeting in your day-to-day life, is just such an important piece to, I feel like, the longevity of how well we can keep our like mental wellness going, and how much faster it takes us to bounce back from those moments that we all have when we're like, see ya, I'll be on the couch. Someone comes and knocks on the door soon.
Yeah.
And you know that someone's coming because you've kind of built that network and that community.
Yeah.
Go
Sorry,
ahead,
go ahead, Diana.
No, I was just saying, yeah, that's it.
Just a good old yeah. No,
Yeah.
I feel what you're saying. And people used to, I mean, a lot of people still do, but 100 years ago, everybody went to church every single week. They had something to, or, whatever their place of worship was, and they had a community built into that. And if you look even further past that, it was like everybody basically lived in a village where they knew each other. And that just doesn't exist for most people in the US anymore. And so again, we're disconnected, and we have childhood trauma and things like that occur that cause other mental health issues. And you go to a therapist to fix those, or to process those. And there's great work that can be done there. But then it's also like, with this broader conversation, I think the three of us and in the field more broadly are trying to imagine, what does society look like in an ideal state where people's mental health and their lived experience is properly honored and supported, not just in the therapeutic conversation, but more broadly in society and in daily life. And I would love to be part of solutions for that, and bringing that to life and making it possible. And I think, like you said, therapists are a big part of it, but it's also, your kids' coaches at school and the PE teacher and their teacher and the other parents at school. And
Yep.
the way that I look at it is this whole trend we're seeing with more focus on mental health is fighting that initial stigma that has stopped people from looking inside their own minds and hearts. And as we create more permission collectively to look inside our hearts, I hope that it creates a new web or tapestry of connections that we can make beyond just the mental health conversation and go, how do we get back into cooperation with each other to do something bigger than ourselves, that has purpose, that gives people some direction, that makes kids feel like they belong, where parents have shared resources to make a beautiful environment for their children and for all of us.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. The evolution of our society, we've touched on this a little bit just in terms of like, capitalism and, just like inflation, like, all of these things that we're grappling with on a daily basis, right? People used to go home and have dinner together. Families would, have dinner together, but, now parents are working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet. And so I agree with you. I think, again, it's a larger scale kind of societal, reconstructing and reconfiguring to ensure that everyone has access to the things that will help them to be as healthy and happy as possible. And I'm super excited about lots of things in the mental health space that have the potential to do that. I think that there's a huge area for AI to really be used in a good way for mental health. I know there's a lot of like, everyone's like scared about it, but I think it could be really make a huge difference. And I'm also really into lately psychedelics and mental health. That is something that the research is showing can be really, really life-changing for a lot of people. And also has a kind of a community aspect to it. In some circles, people do it together and come out on the other side feeling great. Not that I'm advocating for that. You definitely want to make sure that you have a provider that you're working with. But, I think this conversation is just highlighting for me just all of the different ways and avenues that are still available and the unbeaten paths that we can kind of walk down together to make mental health a more helpful conversation to be had.
And I think there's this interesting dynamic that's happening where things are developing with technology like AI and all of those things, but also I think there's a real longing, and I'm seeing a lot of people that want to return or see a return to like you were talking about, Jesse, like it takes a village, right? Like we got to do a better job of like introducing ourselves to the neighbor that just moved into the house next door that we're going to live next door to for 30 years. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why are we not saying hello?
Yeah.
And like that it takes all of us, like I definitely was one of those kids that grew up like I came home from school and like did my homework and I was gone like on my bike with all the kids from the neighborhood until like dinner time. And like everybody's parent was my parent in some way, right? Like there were always eyes on, and people were collectively like looking out for each other. And I think that there's a lot of people who are also trying to make that happen as well. So it's interesting to see, because I think it feels like it's two very opposite directions, with technology and with kind of people trying to connect in the real world, quote unquote, again. But I think it's all good, right? And in every direction, like everybody has a different flavor that they go for, and the more options that people have that help them to be feeling healthy and happy, like I'm all for all of it.
100%. 100%. Awesome.
So we, being as you are our first guest, we had thought that we would start to put together like a few questions that we end episodes with with our guests. So it's just 4 questions that we wanted to just run through, and maybe these 4 will stick forever, or maybe we'll change them. Who
I'm sure
knows?
we will. I'm sure
Knowing
we'll.
us, they're going to change.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll change them, but these are the questions of today.
We're like, these are the questions for all of our guests, and next episode will be like, these are the questions. They're brand new. And the next one will
So
be,
far, this is 100% of the guests. So.
Oh.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let me see if I can pull them up. I sent them out, and then of course I don't have them. All right. So let's see. The first one is mental health still carries a lot of stigma, like we have talked about throughout this episode. How do you have open conversations about mental health in your particular community?
I've been fortunate that the friend group that I've co-created over the last few years is open to conversations like that. But I will have to say that took time to identify those people and also to become one of those people myself, which I think actually brings up a really good point. I'm kind of realizing right now. I noticed that when I worked on myself and processed and removed those feelings of shame about even talking about my own mental health and created opportunities for me to share vulnerably, other people around me did it. So that's my best answer is like it wasn't just, oh, I found the right friends overnight or something like that. It was more like I worked on myself and then I helped create situations where that would be more possible.
Mm-hmm. That's so powerful. It's like what you were
Mhm.
talking about earlier, that like modeling it, once
Mhm.
people have kind of like a template or a blueprint for how the conversation can go and that it's okay, that nothing terribly bad is going to happen if we have these conversations. It makes a huge difference. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Should we
Okay.
alternate questions, Diana? How are we going to do
Yeah.
this?
I was just gonna say, I'll just take the next question and we'll go back and forth and then
Okay.
yeah, perfect. Okay. So this one, especially with your story, I think is a really interesting and a good question if we do say so ourselves. So we have that many people struggle with maintaining a work-life balance, right? And we know that that can have a significant impact on their mental health. So what works for you to find balance in this fast-paced world?
Yeah. Okay. So a few things about this. One thing is I came to accept that I don't need to buy certain things in order to be happy, which
Mm,
sounds really obvious. But once I started to realize that actually buying things does not make me happy, it took off some of the pressure to make as much money. Now, that
mhm,
doesn't remove all of the pressure, I will say, but that was one aspect of it.
mm,
And then the other aspect was just for me having hobbies that I absolutely love to do outside of work and totally committing to making time for them to the degree that I can made a really big difference.
mhm. Yeah, that's
You
self-care.
play disc golf by any chance?
I do not. No.
Oh, okay.
I
Just
have.
kidding.
I have. Do I look like a disc golf player in particular? You just have that vibe.
When we were talking with Mark earlier, who is an avid, amazing disc golfer, just won like a championship a couple of weeks ago. Go Mark, slay!
Congratulations, Mark.
um, but he was like, "Where's he from?" I'm like, "I think like West Coast, like north, northwest." And
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh, I bet he disc golfs."
No, it's a thing. It's a thing. And that's why I knew what it was. And outside of my college, there's this forested area where they have like a disc golf course set up. So I have participated a little bit, but I wouldn't say that's like part of my life at all. But it's awesome. It's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Question number 3. Everyone talks about self-care and wellness, but it can be challenging to prioritize it in our busy day-to-day lives. what are some self-care strategies that you use or would recommend to people who are struggling to find time for themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, this one's tough because like people have work obligations, they have family obligations, and I'm definitely sensitive to the fact that some people have more of those or less of those. But for me, getting up with enough time before work to go get some sunlight and just get my mindset right, like I mean, I call it like a sacred beginning to my day. For me, it's not a particularly religious kind of sacred. It's more like my own personal kind of spirituality and just connecting with myself and with nature and the universe, honestly. And that gets my mindset right. And then the other thing so everybody's heard of affirmations and, saying things like, I will be successful or I am a good person. I don't know. These are really bad examples, right? But affirmations put distance between you and the thing that you're trying to affirm. It's kind of saying like, I am who I am, but this is what I want to get. And so what I learned from somebody a few months ago is the concept of confirmations, which are confirming what you already are and what you already have. So it's
Yeah.
looking for examples of things that you have done that you are proud of in your relationships, at work, whatever the case may be, and just highlighting those and restating them to yourself. That's been like really beneficial for me, and you can do it for free. So
Love that. I love that confirmations. I think that's so great and like really in line with
mhm,
manifesting more of the good stuff in our lives and, solidifying those aspects of ourselves that we want to remain intact. So that's
exactly.
really
Yeah.
cool. Awesome. Okay, so our last question is that we live in such a fast paced world where small moments of joy and gratitude can often be overlooked. And so, what are some of your glimmers, those little things in life that bring you joy, even if they're small or, to others might seem insignificant?
My wife and I have a cat that we are absolutely infatuated with. We love our cat so much. Her name is Catty Wampus, and we call her Wampus for short. And
Oh my God.
so we started getting her these they're like catnip infused treats.
Oh,
And she can hear if I crinkle the bag on the other floor, if she's on the bottom floor and I'm on the second floor of the house and I crinkle the bag, she can hear it and she comes running up the stairs. And there is nothing that brings me more joy than crinkling that bag and knowing that she's just turning her head like to look to see where it is. And then I hear her tiny little feet run up the stairs and she just dives head first in. She'll dive into the bag. Like she tries to get her nose into the opening and stuff. And it's just the most adorable thing ever. And yeah, it's, anyone can afford cat treats. It's pretty good. So
that's awesome. That whole thing is awesome. From her name to the bag crinkle
yeah.
to the slow turn of the head and the leap up the stairs. I'm like picturing it all. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's great.
That's
Well,
amazing.
yeah. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a treat to have you on with us today. And, I can't thank you enough for just your level of vulnerability and your willingness to share your story. And, even though you have clearly stated that obviously there's some benefit there for you in terms of the catharsis, I think the benefit for others is just astronomical, to have folks like you who are willing to not only share your story, but also create a platform for other people to do so. So I'm really excited and happy that you were able to join us today. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
so
being our
much.
very first guest, Jesse.
Yay. Yes, raise the roof.
It's an honor. You two are awesome. I love what you're doing here. Super happy that we could meet. I think this is a really great program that you're building. And yeah, thanks a lot. It means a lot to me to be invited on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And how was your ranch water? Was it as good as mine?
Honestly, it goes down pretty easy. I have to say there's not that many ingredients. So I thought that I'd be tasting like straight tequila, but it was pretty easy on the palate, I have to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good like poolside summer, like
Exactly.
all day situation.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Awesome.
bring in the good weather and the good cocktails.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jesse. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
And for all of you listening, thank you so much for joining us here. We are super excited for having our first ever guest. That was such an amazing conversation.
So good. It was so
Oh my
good.
gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. He's really doing amazing things and his outlook is so great.
Yeah.
And just very inspirational.
I'm like inspired to try and wake up and have a sacred beginning to my day. I
I
was like,
know.
wow, that sounds amazing.
It does. It does. It really does. Yeah.
When my alarm goes off, I do
It's not
not feel
sacred.
like I'm in a sacred space in that moment.
I
I would love to like make that happen in my life.
literally.
It's a new
Literally.
goal that Jesse
I
has
have
given to me.
I have sacred endings. I'll say that. Sacred endings. That's my vibe. I hope you all stick around for our meditation minute and enjoy.
Mhm.
And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review. And tell a friend to tell a friend
Yeah.
about the podcast.
Come have a cocktail at the speakeasy.
Yeah.
Bye.
Toodaloo.